Hi, my name is Sarah Seipel and I'm the author of Sewing Sarah's Style. Today we're going to be learning how to do the quilt as you go method with a twist, aka easier. Alright, so normally when you do a quilt as you go quilt, you have the top of your quilt, the batting in the middle, and the backing, and you're quilting them all together. And if you're like me, juggling all those layers is difficult. And so what I do is I have the top of my quilt square. This is a 4 by 4 inch square. I take the batting, I cut it an inch smaller. So this is a 3 by 3 square of batting. So there's two ways to do this method. One uses less fabric, but one is harder. So this way uses less fabric. You go ahead and you make an X, so you quilt through the square, and you don't use a back. This is a little bit harder because you have this batting that wants to move around, so you have to make sure you hold on to it. If you're a sewer like me, where my sewing machine is an appendage of my body, or has become an appendage of my body, this method will probably work for you. If you're a beginner, probably not a good idea because you're going to get pretty frustrated. So this is the harder method. Well, a little bit harder. And so you would quilt your top of your quilt and your batting together, and then you would go ahead and set it aside. And then you would sew your seams together and fold it over, and that's how you would connect the top of your quilt. And then when you were finished, you go ahead and sew the back of the quilt on a little bit later, and I have a good technique for that too. So that way you're only working with the top of the quilt and the batting at one time. The easier version is to have the top of your square and then the back of the square. Notice I really don't care what this looks like because it's not going to show. This is my back. I sandwich the batting in between, and that way it gives you a little bit more traction to make your square. The batting's not going to move, gives you a little bit of layer, makes your quilt extra warm. So this is for the beginners, and this is for like the intermediate beginners, like the people that already know how to sew, and if you want to save a little extra fabric. Alright, so now what you do is once you would sew these right sides together, make that seam, fold it over, come over here, go ahead and press that seam. This is for my beginners who don't necessarily know what pressing a seam is. You're going to press that seam nice and flat. And this is different too, so I cut the batting an inch smaller than my top square so that I don't have batting in my seam. It helps it lay flatter. And I also don't want to sit here and be like, oh, I hope my batting isn't burning, oh no. Yeah, I get a little nervous when I'm trying to iron batting. So that way, nice and clean seam, no batting in between, don't have to worry about a house fire. Alright, so then you have your two quilt blocks like this, right? So if you want, as you're sewing your quilt, you'd make this row as long as you want. So you're going to have horizontal rows that are going to go this way, and then you're going to have to sew them together, right? So after you have all your rows laid out, then you're going to have to attach them. I'm going to show you how to attach the rows. Alright, so I'm going to sew these together. Remember, right sides together. I'm going to use about a 1/2 inch seam here. You want to hold your threads back here so they don't get tangled in beginning your seam. Alright. Normally you want to back tack that, but I'm trying to get the rest of this tutorial. Alright, so then you have that. You would again press this. And then this is how you would join your two rows together. So it would be like this. You put this row on top of that row, right sides together again. And if you're a beginner, you're gonna want to pin these so that they don't move. I'm so used to holding them together without pinning. That's why I'm gonna just go ahead and sew it. Again, about 1/2 inch seam. And we'll back. And then you'll open it up and the rows will be attached, and you'll just keep sewing your horizontal rows together and sewing these together until your quilt top is finished, and then you'll be ready for your backing. But that's another story. All right, have a good evening. Bye.